Good afternoon. I'm Chanel McPherson-George, Assistant Principal at Bedford Free School, with responsibility for Quality First provision and SEND. And I'm aiming to talk to you about our overview of SEND provision and talking about the range of stakeholders that we have and inform what transitions looks like for SEND pupils in particular at Bedford Free School. So I'll talk to you about our overall vision first of all. This is an excerpt from our Quality First provision and staff handbook. So I'll just leave that up for you to have a look through for a couple of moments, and please feel free to pause the video to do so. So we have a very sharp focus on quality first provision, and we want to ensure that the level of teaching within the classroom supports all needs. But of course, we do ensure that pupils who are supported by TAs, which we call learning mentors at Bedford Free School, have that additional layer of support in classrooms, which we then call our Wave 2. So we've broken down quality first provision into key areas at Bedford Free School, and this is all within our staff handbook. So we've talked about key areas of provision, as one being in the environment. So on these tables that you'll see over the next couple of slides, we've got our overall rationale and what that looks like as quality first provision, but also what that looks like as quality first teaching, QFT, in the classroom. So the overall rationale for our environment is that students feel a sense of familiarity, safety, and that's important for students whose conditions can be managed through routines, strong routines. And so, what that looks like in terms of a wider school quality first provision is tidy classrooms, carefully considered seating plans, transitions around the building. You may know that BFS have silent corridors to support students that may suffer from sensory overload as they move from one lesson to the next. And we ensure that they've got their equipment ready, so there's not that sort of panic when they get into the next lesson, which is extremely important for the pupils coming up, and particularly for SEND pupils coming up from year 6 into year 7, and just helping them to get organised and ready for what they have next. We have the days bookended by morning meeting and prep, and then we have a DEAR session in the middle of school, some of which, in terms of reasonable adjustments, we think about as being more bespoke or supported preps, morning meetings and DEARs, where they're led by a learning mentor or supported by a learning mentor to do something very similar, but with the support from additional members of staff. Our quality first teaching, we want all teaching staff to ensure that they have clear expectations of our pupils and make sure that they feel welcome by circulating around the lessons and greeting them on the door, which we call threshold, as they come from lesson to lesson. So that's the environment, and that's sort of an overview or a quick tour of these tables. So what I'll do is take you through the other key components of our provision. The second area is belonging. So you can see here the overall rationale, what that looks like as a whole school quality first provision, and then things for quality first teaching. So I guess the toolkit that teachers would employ, such as using ideas such as tracking the teacher, so ensuring that students are attending to what they need to in the lesson, so they don't miss out on key ideas. Shape is the idea of students being able to be attentive, but also projecting their voices when they are talking and being able to ask questions that help them. The intentional teacher circulation will help support pupils, because we don't want a scenario where we have learning mentors supporting a pupil, but that leads the teacher to forget about that pupil in the lesson because they're being attended to by somebody else. And so we want intentional teacher circulation throughout our classes. And that celebration of classwork, including under the visualizer, helps to foster that sense of belonging as well. Of course, we have the whole school system, such as daily news, shout-outs, inter-house competitions, assemblies, etc., that support all pupils to feel as though they belong in the BFS community. The next area of provision is knowledge, and I think that a lot of the time, if we are supporting students, if it's whether it be through scaffolding or chunking, to understand the work, then we tend to see less of the secondary struggles or behaviours that students, particularly neurodiverse students, may have. So on the overall rationale, we have that ensuring that we have a well-sequenced curriculum for all pupils. In terms of quality first teaching, there's a lot of TLAC techniques that we have there. So Teach Like a Champion often talks about techniques like radar, so looking around the classroom to make sure that either you're picking up the small things, like when a pupil doesn't understand, if they look confused, or if they're not following the exact part that you want them to. And this also involves talking to a learning mentor before and after the lesson to ensure that pupils are picking up on the key parts that they needed to. So, for example, overlearning or support with a learning mentor outside of lessons might support that pupil inside of lessons. And I'll come back to that when I talk about how we deploy our learning mentors too. The fourth area is behaviour. At Bedford Free School, we actually have a reasonable adjustments poster that is for internal inclusion staff only, and that outlines what we do at certain behaviour stage levels for particular pupils. So this is a reasonable adjustment to make sure that pupils are supported to behave in the way that we expect, but also that we are supporting them if things have escalated beyond. So, of course, a huge part of supporting good behaviour is supporting their needs. And so we have learning passports and, of course, follow the targets on the HCPs to ensure that students are behaving in the way that we would want them to, and that lead to success. However, we also have those reasonable adjustments when things don't go the right way. We do have a process where students have an achievement card that they carry around school, and so that is something that, in fact, Bedford Borough have praised in terms of works well for pupils with ADHD. For which we have, in our context of 538 pupils, we have about 15 pupils with that diagnosis on their either learning passports or EHCPs. So it's quite a high need, and we know that there are some underlyings yet to be diagnosed, for example. So we use things such as our Success Mountain, which is basically our behaviour system to support pupils, and we use some of the quality first teaching instructions, such as sort of directing attention, so having empty hands or encouraging student curiosity, but praising that within lessons, and monitoring behaviour targets regularly, as shown through the achievement card. The final area of provision is that support and that second level. So we use that pyramid model whereby we've got quality first provision as our overall offer, and then we go into the different waves. And so wave 2 would then be additional support, and we have things such as teacher-led interventions, core support lessons, which are for example, if a pupil does not have a full complement of GCSEs, they may be, as a Key Stage 4 pupil, identified for additional support lessons. So where they would have an additional option, they have overlearning for core subjects, English, Maths and Science, where they're supported with that. There are other areas where we can support pupils with their learning, such as catch-up club, homework club. The use of Satchel 1 at present helps us to communicate with parents about what homework they have, and also to communicate with their learning support and learning mentors with what homework they have, so they can be supported with it in a school setting as well as at home. We provide pupils with dictionaries for their home languages, and we support them with using those in classes. We identify access arrangements pretty early on so that pupils can be supported with their examinations, and we do see that has a huge impact with their attainment lower on down the school. Rather than waiting to see that pupils have been unsuccessful, they can see success early because of the access arrangements that we've identified for them early on. And we don't shy away from parent meetings as well. We like to communicate with our parents regularly, and that is outside of progress evenings as well. But we do have a SEND room where pupils and their parents can drop in at each and every parents' evening that we host at school, so they can come in with any concerns. What we're looking at developing later on down the line is a drop-in for parents, so like a parent forum for SEND. An additional layer for our SEND pupils with EHCP or SEND needs is that we do key worker communications, and so each pupil with an EHCP and some other SEND pupils are assigned a key worker that will work with the families quite closely. So I'm going to move on to how we deploy our TAs, which we call learning mentors. I've used the TAs as sort of universal language, but I will refer to them as learning mentors as well. We draw from the EEF guidance on how to deploy learning mentors at our school, and so all of the research there is on the EAF website, but I've put a snippet on here that you can refer to. Again, we have deployed key workers in lessons to helicopter support, because we believe that pupils should have that quality first teaching in lessons and be removed from lessons as the word I'm looking for, as a minimum. We don't want the pupils to be removed from lessons too often, and so that should be a very minimal intervention there. Key workers, as I've mentioned, each learning mentor is assigned 5 or 6 pupils, some more, and we engage with them regularly, and we check in with the pupils more often than with the parents, but we contact parents when needed. We also have parental support, so they might be involved with filling out parts of an EHAR or being involved in parts of a EdPsych interview. Learning mentors also adapt materials. They maintain student profiles and something called Provision Map that we've brought in this year. I'll talk a bit more about that later. And we source and monitor alternative provision. So we might go out on visits to check how pupils are getting on alternative provision, or we source them as something that we've seen that would be beneficial for their needs. We also deploy our learning mentors as doing observations in the lessons. While senior leaders do wanders and might pick up areas of SEN provision that need improving, I think it's very useful that we have people that are on the ground more regularly doing SEND observations. I'll talk about what they look like. In fact, if I skip forward just a bit, we've got part of the Learning Mentors Handbook here that shows how conducting observations and giving feedback should run. So please do feel free to pause this and have a look at the instructions and the training that our learning mentors have received. The essence of this is that the learning mentor would sit in the classroom that they usually support a student in, and they would take notes about the pupil as relates to their EHCP or learning passport targets. These observations are also used in relation to pupils that we might want to identify for SEND, and I know that one of the key aims of this webinar is to sort of talk about how we identify SEND in our school also. So in this case, if we are trying to establish what a SEND need might be for a pupil, we wouldn't have any learning passport or EHCP targets that we'd be following, but we'd be looking out for signs, as well as teacher feedback and as well as pupil voice that would show us that they may need some sort of support going forwards, and then we'd follow the relevant processes to put the right support in place for those pupils. This is something that we'll be doing quite early on when we have SEND open days for our year 6s into year 7s, and when we have our transfer days, and of course in September when we want to get a bit more information about our pupils and what support they may need. So these observations tie into our staff training, and they also feed into our training platform, which is called Step Lab. We are able to give a what went well and EBI to staff as to whether they are doing what is required to support these SEND pupils on their journey to being successful on their SEND targets. And so would give that feedback and check in with staff as well to see whether they are on the ground implementing that quality first provision that we'd hoped when we wrote their learning passports or when we wrote their EHCP targets, because it's good to see how that is being implemented on the ground with teachers. And so we give that feedback regularly, and it also feeds into staff training that we would run. So I would have an overview of all of these observations, and as the link, the SLT link for SEND, I would then bring that to the teaching and learning CPD forum. So we've talked about most of these aims and targets now. I think the one thing I've missed out is the Bedford Borough projects that we're involved in, and I think I'll admit and hold my hand up that we need to be more involved with some of the Bedford Borough projects, and so that's something we're looking to improve. But we have had help from our SendLink and the training and education team there, who have led some CPD for our whole school, which is brilliant. And of course, we're very much in touch with the early help team as well. So for Assess, Plan, Do, Review, I've got here a screenshot of our provision map. It's just a bit of an overall screenshot of when we were developing and populating provision map. So it shows some of the active provisions that we have in place, some of the reviews that we need to be mindful of and that are overdue or upcoming. So we're looking at updating those and ensuring that we review the cycle as often as we need to. There are some parts that we don't buy into on provision map, such as the cost and impact of our provisions. So therefore, when we have a review cycle, it's more so internal than what we can upload onto provision map. Provision map, if some of you are aware, do ask for some of your teacher wages and salary information, which we've not bought into. And so therefore we can't look at the cost and the impact or the perceived impact of those interventions on this programme, but we do so internally. I think this programme is pretty useful, and it helps us with our provisions as well, and it helps us to stay on track with when we need to review provisions too. And so this is what we use, because it sends out email reminders to us as to when we need to review EHCPs or learning passports, which is really useful. In terms of wider staff CPD, we have staff briefings that gets messages across that are short and sharp with particular pupils. So we have an area called Student Watch on our SEND briefings, and that's just a useful quick snippet of information for staff. We have longer after-school professional development on a variety of aspects of quality first provision and teaching and learning. We have a member of staff who is now our designated ELSA, and that is something that we are tapping into from Bedford Borough also. Autism beds, Bedford Borough training, and keeping in touch meetings with our SendLink governor as well. We've also got the useful contacts for our school. So my email is up first with the lens of the SLT quality first provision and SEND. Then we have our acting SENCO with another SENCO due to be starting in September. Her details are not yet on here, but if you do need those contact details, if you're watching later on during the year or beyond September, then we'll be more than happy to provide those details. And a bit of our SEND policy is also linked on this presentation, which you'll be able to receive. Thinking back to the transitions process for SEND learners, we have a plan that is created by our whole inclusion team. So that is our Key Stage 3 and Key Stage 4 leads, as well as the safeguarding team and the SEND team. We have a range of sort of meetings that stem from our after our offer day, which happens on 1st of March, we have the PIF forms that we chase up until the middle of March, which is our parent information forms. And once we have those, we're then able to identify our free school meal pupils and chase up any outstanding information with regards to parental voice on SEND as well. When we have that information, we're then able to send out information to parents about one-to-one meetings. Those one-to-one meetings are led by all staff at our school, and we get a better lens on what staff members at previous schools, so the feeder schools, as well as what parents deem their pupils' SEND needs to be. We're able to have those conversations and induct them into the Bedford Free School Way and the Code of Conduct and Homeschool Agreement. So our SEN team are very active at that point in terms of delivering those one-to-one meetings. We also then allocate form classes, and we try to do that on a variety of factors. So we think about where the feeder schools, where pupils' feeder schools are, and make sure that they have somebody that they know well. We also support pupils in lessons that are unstreamed, so they are just in form classes. And so for a lot of the time, it's quite useful for us to have tutor groups which reflect some of the core needs. So we may have a spread of EHCP students across the 4 tutor groups, so that we don't end up through lack of due diligence having all of our EHCP pupils in one form class, for example, so that there's a spread and an intentional spread across the form classes, which makes it easier for support as well, that learning mentor in-class support. We collate and triangulate parent information, feeder school information, and our observation information to inform the best support for pupils. And then we have that establishment of the key worker information or allocations, so that we're then able to allocate our learning mentors to a family, and we can monitor the school transition process well into the September term. We then have quite an early keeping in touch evening with parents, so form tutors lead that, and we can then talk to parents about any teething issues that they may have had after a few weeks of joining the school. Our transition days are when we invite the pupils in to have a day as a Year 7 pupil. They come in their Year 6 uniforms, and they get to see what the school looks like on a normal school day. And that's when we're able to give additional tours before that process and thereafter to students with EHCPs or high SEND needs, so that they feel a bit more comfortable with the transition process and feeling a bit more familiar with the school setting. We also do school visits during this time, so our SENCO and assistant SENCO, and perhaps myself, will go out to primary schools and have those conversations with phase transfer leads there and SENCOs there to have those discussions. And so we're hoping to get those underway in earnest, so that we can get a bit more information that informs our triangulation of that information, so that we can inform the best support when they arrive at Bedford Free School. That this process is ongoing and growing, and I'm sure I've missed bits out, but I'm happy to be contacted with regards to what SEND looks like, and more so what works well in other schools, so that we can emulate that also and make this process a lot smoother. So I will finish by leaving the rest of our details up on screen, and look forward to hearing from you and sharing good practice and receiving that good practice from other secondaries in our area. That is the end of our presentation for Bedford Free School. Thank you very much for listening.